Welcome back, everybody, to We Are TPM with myself, Kyle Teixeira, sitting next to John Teixeira. Once again, we are back this week to discuss trust asset protection, or trust protection, or protecting your assets.
Do you trust the asset protection that you have? Is that what this is about?
Trust is a
Do you
big
trust
word.
it?
No,
Trust is a verb? Trust is a noun.
If you trust us to discuss this topic or to listen any further and want to give us a call at 817-818-9039 or shoot us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm.com. Let's get into it. So, do you trust somebody to protect your assets?
So let's reframe it, I guess, right? Using a trust to protect your real estate assets, right? That's what we're talking about. So there's like 4 basic reasons to do this. And I guess the biggest one would be just to liability protection, no?
You're jumping past. What's a trust? I mean, I have trust. I have some
Okay,
trust
go
for
for
you.
it.
You have some trust for me, right?
Tell
That's
us what a trust
talking
is.
about.
Yep.
Trust is, we're talking about a trust like the entity. Like a trust is an entity, kind of like a business is an entity, or like an LLC is an entity, but a trust is a certain structure for a certain purpose. So let's get into that. Well, I have one.
What does the
Doesn't
entity
just
have?
rich people have one? Like,
no,
you got to have
anybody
30
can have
million
a trust.
plus in assets to have one.
Well, you want to know something interesting? A trust can be created. People think trusts are difficult to create and expensive to create. You can, at least in the state of Texas. I don't know this to be true in other states. I'm sure it's true in other states, but at least in the state of Texas, a trust can be formed literally just by recording it, writing it down. Like literally record a trust. You could just say that I, Kyle Teixeira, create this 1, 2, 3 trust, and it literally is legally formed by doing that. Now, what that means is like people oftentimes create trusts by assigning a property to it, right? And that literally forms the trust in legal forms. Now, would I ever do it that way? And do I think that that's a strong enough way to create a trust? I don't. I don't think that that's smart. I'm just telling you that it can be created that way.
Create one that way. I don't think you can use it effectively that way.
You can't. That's my point.
Make it an entity recognized
just
by
an
the
interesting
state,
fact is all it is.
It is.
So what's part of a trust? What's the important parts of a trust then, Kyle? Tell us.
The structure or the reason for it?
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is first you have trustees. That's the most important thing people are going to want to know about, right? They're going to want to know, okay, if I set up a trust, who's controlling it, who's doing it? I don't want to lose control. You don't lose control because you get to choose when you set up the trust who the trustees are, meaning who's controlling the trust, right?
Correct. It's kind of like a holding company in a sense, but not really. It has other benefits. But yeah, you have layers to it. You have trustees. So the trustee is who is in control of said trust. Generally, the trustee is who it's wrapped around, whose life it's backing, but doesn't have to be. And then you have beneficiaries. So, for example, when I started a trust today, it's a living trust, and I made myself the trustee, and I put all my assets in it, I'd be the beneficiary, right? And you may ask why. Well, then why do it? You already have that as a person, as a living person. Well, there are reasons. So, a living person can die, right? That's one reason.
Well, they will.
Yeah, exactly.
100% of the time. The batting average is as good as it can be.
Yeah. So,
I mean, that's not true. Jesus didn't die, so he's the only one that has managed to. Well, technically, he did die and he came back. So never mind. It's back to 1,000.
So he doesn't need a living trust.
No, he doesn't.
No,
he's good.
He'd be solid on that.
He's got tons of protection.
So the number one reason is that I, especially with real estate, is avoiding probate. So probate is what happens. So let's backtrack here. You pass away, you don't have a trust. What happens? Hopefully you have a will, right? And a will outlines the event of your death. It outlines what happens, regardless of what's written in it, at the event of your death. It cannot dictate, or it does not control and dictate a continuous basis of instructions over time, right? So say in your will, you're like, I want my kids to have distributions from my assets every 2 months. Okay. Well, that's great and all to put that in a will, but there's no vehicle to make that
Well,
that wording possible.
okay, but there is an executor, a lot like a trustee, right? So there is somebody that's hopefully carrying out the wishes of that will, right? But it's limited. It's limited to what you write down, and it is subject to a probate court.
Yeah, and then you'd have to be like, and that's not specific enough. I want my assets assigned to this person so that they can do this, and then they can do this, and they can distribute it, and all this stuff. So wills don't handle that, and essentially, at a high level, trusts do. That's one reason to do it. We can dig into that more conceptually, but
no, that was one of our reasons for getting the trust. So let's talk a little bit more about a trust as an entity. Here's something else that people don't realize: you can put a trust in a trust, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes,
technically, like most of this is is done for not just asset protection, but for tax planning and what's the word I'm looking for, Kyle? Not inheritance, but
planning
estate
for
planning.
your
Estate planning. Yes,
yeah.
Sorry. So that's what most people use this for, and you're setting up like a trust for your family. So, for instance, what if I were to pass away with no beneficiaries except for you, right? And I have a trust, and all of my other beneficiaries are already deceased. I'm the last one to go, except for you. And you also have a trust.
Me being your son in this scenario.
Me being your son. You are my son still, right?
I know, I'm just making sure
okay.
I'm still
in
my
the
son
scenario,
in the
you're my son
yeah.
also.
Okay.
I could literally call for my trust to just become part of your trust, right? And then my trust upon my death and your trust just doesn't absorb it. Mine becomes as an umbrella underneath your trust, right?
Yeah, so it can hold, like a person, it can hold equity ownership in entities. It can hold equity ownership in businesses. It can hold bank accounts. It can replace you essentially as an entity that has rights to stuff. So, and there's different types of trusts, but we're starting out talking about a revocable living trust. And in this scenario, basically during your lifetime, you retain full control. It's usually if you're married, it's like a husband and wife thing, right? So both spouses retain full control, but it's not necessarily protected from creditors and lawsuits and stuff like that.
No, they could still come after. So if you have a car and you put it in the trust, don't think that now that car cannot be, taken away from you if you stop paying the loan. That's not the case. It can still be. That is still the asset that is held as collateral for the loan and can still be taken away, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't just protect everything.
So and it doesn't, the other thing about trusts is they can be used to be as specific as you want to outline your dissolution, and with like what happens at your death. Like a will can do that, but this not just can outline it specifically, it can instruct specifically, it can give timelines, it basically, whoever becomes the trustee after your death has to follow the guideline or the very specific instructions or very generalized instructions in your trust, right? And it continues on. It continues to be the trustee. They continue to be that the trustee can change. The instructions can be prolonged through generations. Where in a will, if you had an executor, once that executor's job is done and the probate is finished, like it's done. Whether that was passed off to someone else, whether your will said to create a trust and do all this stuff afterwards. The point is, it's more of an event thing. This is an entity that outlives you for the purpose of holding.
So I assume we're going to get into, we've already talked about some avoiding probate, but we're going to get into some of the reasons to do this. But I want to kind of big picture it a little bit over the trees because I'm the oldest one here. I'm the one closest to my grave, hopefully. God knows, but I hope I am. So, the thing that people don't realize, and I've been guilty of this exact same thing. The things that people don't realize when they're thinking about this, it feels kind of morbid sometimes, thinking about your death. But when you do think about your passing and you think about your stuff and how is it going to be left, it's so important to think from the perspective of, you spent your whole life trying to build something, build wealth, trying to build a legacy of whatever it is you have to leave for your family, right? That's important to a lot of people. What am I leaving for my family, right? It's not just here to fund my life, but also what am I leaving after I'm gone to everyone who's still here? And so if you're going to think that way about building this stuff, why not think that way about making sure you don't leave them a mess?
Yeah,
right?
and I've seen this happen, and this can happen, that if you don't have proper estate planning after building, a portfolio or real estate and all these things you intended to leave to your family, then your death can actually make that crumble in certain scenarios.
Yeah.
Because probate is we're just speaking about probate. Probate is the legal court process you have to go through with approvals and all this stuff. When it's not predefined, a court has to check off on all of it, right? Well, that can be an extremely slow process. Like, we're talking, this can take years, especially if you have a bunch of assets, if people are fighting over stuff, if your family starts fighting over it and delaying all this stuff, what happens to the assets in that time? What happens when you lose it? Let's use an example. I'm a landlord. This is a kind of an audience we're talking to here too. I'm a landlord. I have 10 properties. They're all in my LLCs, or it's all wrapped into an LLC. All good. That LLC's defined on what happens to my shares. Well, if you self-manage, for example, well, now you're the manager, and all you had was that LLC to wrap all those properties. Well, you pass away. Who gets that LLC? Is it properly defined in your operating docs? If it's not, then your heirs just get it by default, right? Well, you're no longer managing those properties. Do they have the knowledge to be a landlord of 10 properties? Well, probably not. Can they go hire a property manager? No, they can't sign a contract with a property manager until an executor is assigned. When is an executor going to be assigned, or an administrator? Well, once probate starts, you have to hire a lawyer to start probate, and you have to do all these things. Well, what if 2-3 months go by? What if your tenants find out you passed away, and they're like, well, we're not paying the family, or who do we pay, or what happens? Well, now the mortgages aren't getting paid. And, these things can happen very quickly. You could have an entire 10 property estate that gets taken from your family within 6 months via foreclosure if these things aren't done properly. So this is I'd say it's an extreme example, but it's not. It happens. And these legal pieces get in the way of proper process.
Yeah, and so what you just described, I would describe as, can we say shit show on this? I would describe it that way.
It can be, yeah. I mean, you can say that too, but because where do you think those rents were going when you were collecting it? They were probably going into a bank account under the LLC's name. Well, you think that bank is going to let your family walk in and start spending money out of that account, or start even getting access to that account? Because actually, if the bank finds out you passed and there's not a direct beneficiary that bank has listed, they're locking up the account. They're not even going to let people put money into it. So,
yeah, sometimes that's the point. The point is, those are all the things you need to worry about, and that's why you try to avoid probate, especially if you die with no will, no trust, and it's intestate. Then that's the worst kind, right?
But I want to use the same example of what do you change there? Because it just kind of freaks people out. Maybe. Well, if you had the trust, then and it says that your LLC. Your LLC docs could be defined this way, or it could already be this way. Your trust could own that LLC. Well, on your passing, the day of your passing, whatever your trust defines as the trustee after your passing now has control of that. They can do stuff. Everything I just described can be done from day one. It's all predefined, and there's nothing to change. The bank already knows the trust owns the bank account. They already know the trust owns the LLC and has control of those properties, and it's all kind of protected. The only thing that changes is the trustee.
Especially if you did the trust, if you allowed an attorney to do the trust, and you went the extra steps to do that, then that just solidifies it even more. If anybody questions it, There's an attorney involved that created it, that can testify to the creation and all that good stuff.
And some people can say that they trust their family and all that stuff, and that's great. But another thing I see
You can't.
that happens in this
Humans.
is
You can't trust human beings.
It also allows something that you can't get on the other side of this, which is a separation of beneficial ownership and control. So in a normal inheritance, if your heirs just directly inherit it, well, there is no definition of who has control. And for example, what I mean by that is you can assign a trustee that controls and directs all those assets, while your kids, for example, still get the financial benefits. They don't have control. They don't have they can't just go sell all 10 in that example, like day one, if that's not what you wanted. You built this probably for generational wealth, not for them to sell it for a big chunk that day. Well, you can protect that in a trust, says they can't do that. Even if it's a trustee, you can tell the trustee they can't do that and they can't make the sale, So it allows that separation of control. So you could even have your trustee be some completely third party like a bank, to where, for example, your kids have to come get, they're getting distributions, for example, every month. But
let's simplify this. You're really getting down deep into it. But look, how would an average investor that just has a few properties? Let's talk about this. First of all, why would they set up a trust, and how would they do it and make it sound a little simpler than what you just did? Because you just really complicated something to make it and you did it for good reason. You did it to demonstrate all the things that it could do and how it can help you.
That example, but yeah.
I got it. But let's back up and simplify how a regular investor might use a trust, and how simple it actually is, because it is a pretty simple process.
Well, you say regular investor. Let's take it back to as simple as it gets. I believe you should have a trust if you own any piece of real estate.
Okay.
So even if you own your personal residence.
Right. Okay.
So why?
Well, for the reasons that we were going to get into, to shield you from liability, to help through the probate, like we talked about, right? So that there is no probate, and so that your assets are clearly defined on who's controlling them and where they're going, right? And what is to happen to them. I know that tax planning is a part of this, and I'm not going to speak to the tax planning part of it, but I know that there is an element of tax planning here. In when you die, there is, we call it death tax. It's an inheritance tax, right? So how do you use a trust to help with that? I'm not going to pretend to be a CPA, but it just
we're not CPAs, and this is not financial advice. But my understanding of an example I could give.
We're getting into this. Let's go. We're getting into tax planning.
Well, no, it's not the inheritance tax, 'cause that's for a really rich threshold. It's the capital gains that, like, when you're talking about just one property, and this is common in real estate, and your kids inheriting said property. Well, when it gets that simple, if your kids inherit your property. Like, I'm your son. Let's go back to that example. If you buy your house at $250,000, and it's worth $500,000 when I inherit it, I'm paying capital gains tax on $250,000 gain.
That's right.
When I inherit it.
That's right.
If I become the trustee and beneficiary of your trust, the trust does not incur any capital gains, because there is no transfer of that asset.
Right, because it's still in the trust. The trust still owns it. There was no transfer upon death or anything. So good point. So this is exactly the reason why a lot of people, when they inherit property, are forced to sell the property.
Exactly.
Right? They may not want to sell it, but they're forced to, because they can't come up with the $125,000 in your example to pay the tax.
And that's what I always bring up when everyone wants to scream when the media starts talking about taxing unrealized gains. And I'm like, yeah, well, if you ever inherit your parents' property, you will disagree with that. So that's taxing unrealized gains.
Put your properties in the trust. Now the trust technically owns the property. You're the trustee of your trust, but your property is owned by the trust. So when you, as the trustee, as one of the trustees, because hopefully you have more than one, when you pass away, nothing changes with the trust. The trust is still there. The house is still there, owned by the trust, just like it was. Right?
Yep.
Nothing changes.
Yep, it's an entity
that
transfers it.
Yep. Perfect. So, I mean,
and you can layer these things. I mean, like we said, an LLC can still own the properties, and probably should still own the properties in the investor example, and then the trust owns that LLC rather than you owning it.
I think that's the biggest benefit to this. When you look at all the benefits to doing that, that might be the biggest one, right? Like, you're setting all this up. We started this podcast by pointing out that if you build your life trying to build wealth and then you don't set this up properly and you leave this mess to everybody, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about, that you're leaving to
debts
people.
is huge. It's not directly usually talked about in this, but like, for example, a lot of investors get life insurance policies that could cut that in with the intention of, if something were to happen to them, it can wipe out their mortgages and their family can live off the cash flows of their rental properties, right? That's a common thing. Well, if you don't have a trust, your life insurance policy beneficiary just has to be your heirs or your estate, I guess, but that's even hard to do. It has to be someone. So what directs the person getting that to pay off the mortgages? And then what happens if they don't? Because they have the decision to do that or not do that.
So what you're saying is the benefit from the life insurance, the death benefit, can be paid to the trust.
Yes,
the trust can be the beneficiary.
Can be the trust, and the trust can define that the funds from the death benefit are to be used to pay off the mortgages. And then that's what happens. That's the only thing that legally can happen in that scenario where, so you're cutting out the what ifs. You're cutting out the, the room for error in inheritance,
and the room for contention and problems to be caused amongst Kyle, you and I know
decisions to be made, all those
things. We have a family. Our family, I think you would consider to be pretty copacetic, right? We all love and like each other for the most part. There's no, as much as they can get pretty ugly. And I think ours is we're pretty lucky in that aspect. But yet, upon the death of mom and dad, you and I both know that the shit show could start, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you could catch somebody at a vulnerable moment when they need money, or when they're emotionally vulnerable because they're dealing with a recent loss of their parents, or God knows what's going to happen. But through that process, things change. People change. People are human. And you don't want to leave all this to chance and hope that your family stays copacetic like you left it.
Yeah, and there's emotional parts of it that it can be beneficial to your family in so many ways. And most people that create them understand that, or have seen what happens when you don't have that. But we mentioned reducing liability risk and didn't really talk about that. Yeah. So I did say it's not protected from creditors or lawsuits. It's not directly protected in the way like an irrevocable would be, but there is some protection, especially if you layer it, right? Like I mentioned, the mortgage is not getting paid and everyone coming to foreclosure. Well, if all your kids inherit all your assets, they inherit the mortgages with those assets, and they foreclose on them, now they're coming after that estate for what it owes on those debts. And if there was cash in bank accounts, they're coming after all that stuff. And how do you protect that? Well, hold those properties under an LLC, and then the trust owns that LLC. Well, now those properties, the limit of that liability is the LLC's assets, not the trust's assets.
As usual, you've overcomplicated it for us, Kyle. Let me simplify this a little bit. But you are absolutely right. But I want to sue you for some reason. Okay?
I'd hope not.
I'm not going to, but person A is going to sue person B.
Okay.
I can sue you for everything that you have. If I find fault, if the law finds fault in liability, and my lawsuit succeeds, okay, then let's just pretend that I'm given $2 million, and you don't have insurance to pay that $2 million, or you have insurance to pay some of it but not all of it. I can now come after everything that you own, all of your assets. I'm sure you've heard that before. I'm sure everyone here has heard that term before. I'll come after everything you own, right? You come after your house, your businesses, whatever is in your name. Unless it's in this trust, because in this trust owns it, not you.
A living trust, a revocable living trust, doesn't directly protect you from the situation you just described, but it can protect you more than not having it. That's the best I'll say. Because while you're still alive, that's not true. Now, after you pass, that's true. So that's where.
All right. So now you're playing lawyer. That's my understanding of how it works. That's how my understanding of how it works from all my years of being on the planet. But I am not an attorney.
So an irrevocable
let's do all those
trust,
disclosures.
We'll generally talk about an irrevocable trust, because an irrevocable trust is actually giving up your assets like you are completely giving up control to that trust.
I thought we were going to talk about irrevocable trusts.
Well, that's protected from the lawsuits in the ways you described, because it's not tied to your life or anything like that. But there's also land trusts and asset protection trusts. I found out the other day there's gun trusts to hold your guns. I don't know. There's things that hold these.
All right, so we've confused everybody about how it can protect you legally, but it can help you avoiding probate, right? It can help you in your planning for your estate, planning for your taxes. What else can it do?
It can protect you from privacy, kind of like companies. Like you can, a lot of people name like if I was creating a trust with you, it'd be like Kyle and John Teixeira's living trust, right? And that's not advisable. Don't put your name in it because you don't have to. Just because it is your essentially replacement of your being doesn't mean it needs to have your name. It could be the coolest looking person trust in the world. It could be whatever, and then that's what you now own your properties
but
under,
it does,
or your businesses.
Most people do family trusts that way, right? They'll do the Teixeira family trust, or the Jackson 5 family trust.
The Rockefeller trust is not named the Rockefeller trust.
No, they definitely have.
But that's a side point that isn't directly in this, but this is the main vehicle that is used to build family wealth over generations. So when you do get into that's why they call them trust fund babies, right? It's around things like this. Those are mostly irrevocable, but
so I don't know about that, but I would say also around this that you should consult an attorney. So
definitely.
Can you do this? Literally you could probably go on ChatGPT and ask them to create a trust and create trust documents for you, and it'll probably spit it out in less than a minute,
and give you a disclosure that this should be reviewed by a lawyer,
and make you feel like, hey, I can use this. And you could probably take that and go down to the Secretary of State and record it, right, as an entity, and you might get away with that.
Well,
but I wouldn't, because there are so many.
It's the effectiveness of it that I mentioned earlier. Is if anything's not in there or mistaken or anything, or it's challenged and not succeeds that challenge, it ends up in probate anyway, right? So you want it to be done right, is what you're saying.
You want it to be done right. You want somebody who has the experience and know how to put these together, to put it together for you. Ask the right questions of you and your family so that it's all put together properly and it's doing the things you intend for it to do. Otherwise, you wasted your time and money. If you put this together and it didn't accomplish the things you set out to accomplish, then it's a waste.
And if you build a portfolio of wealth for your family, you'd like them to appreciate it after your death, right? Not curse you for it, right?
Exactly. That was my original point.
Yeah,
exactly.
Even the financial benefits I've seen.
Thank you, Mom and Dad.
Like, yeah, this is terrible.
Thank you, Mom and Dad, for doing this, showing us the way, building wealth for us, and showing us how we can do it on our own. Or screw you, Mom and Dad, for leaving us this mess, and now I got to deal with my siblings that are now enemies of mine instead of my siblings, and you know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah. And then I've seen people lose houses because there wasn't a trust or there wasn't a will, and in the example I'm thinking of, the father had kids a long time ago that he never speaks to or anything, and then his 3 kids in his marriage and everything. Well, they could not sell that house because they needed the heirs to sign off on it that were distant, and they didn't know, and they ended up there's situations where they lose that house over that. So, and all the equity you put into it. So
there is one final thing that I was thinking about as a bullet point here that we didn't talk about, and that's properties that have mortgages. the other reason why you want to have an attorney do this for you is because if you put it into the proper type of living trust, you don't have to worry about a mortgage enforcing the due on sale clause, which truthfully, if you put in any kind of trust, most mortgage companies are not going to do that just by a matter of how they operate. But it is a legal fact. It is something to be concerned about. And a due on sale clause is the mortgage's ability to say you have 30 days to pay this or we're taking it from you. If I were to sell a house to somebody else without changing or change title, but still have that using that existing loan, then they could absolutely do that if they wanted to. And this technically, putting it into a trust is technically doing that. But that's why I say you want to make sure you put it in the right kind of trust where you don't have to worry about that.
Or it's in an LLC that the ownership of that.
We didn't talk about that. You want to talk about that before we end up?
I did talk about that.
Combining a trust with an LLC? I don't recall.
I did, and you said I complicated it.
Yeah,
so,
you did. You complicated it so much that you lost me.
Well, if you want to circle back on that, we can. But otherwise, I think everyone would like to go make themselves a trust and get a call to an attorney. So if you guys...
call an attorney.
Yeah.
For sure.
You should find that number elsewhere. But if you want to talk to us about anything or get referrals for such things, give us a call, 817-818-9039. Shoot us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm, and we are out.
Later, haters.